when I was in college, I worked at the local PBS affiliate as a production assistant. And during auction season or pledge drive, there was always a lot of downtime while the broadcasts were actually happening and the phones weren't ringing. And so there was a lot of time to socialize and chat, and especially with strangers who had volunteered to answer the phones for us. And I got to talking one evening with a gentleman, and he asked me about my musical tastes. And I can understand why he was curious. I looked a bit different back then. I had a mohawk, I wore black lipstick, and I wore flannel shirts and a jean jacket covered in band pins. But those band pins were varying from punk bands to Bob Dylan. And I explained to him that my musical tastes were very varied, that I liked a lot of new music and unusual music, but really my favorite artist was Bob Dylan. And I'd grown up listening to people like Pete Seeger, the Weavers, Peter, Paul and Mary, the Limelighters. And this gentleman paused for a moment and really squinted me down. And then he said, "What, were you raised by a couple of communists?" Now, that was an unexpected comment, and I had never really thought before about the musical influences that my parents had on me. But it was definitely their music that I grew up listening to when I was very young. My mom really favored the Carpenters, and I wore out that 8-track, as well as Carole King's Tapestry. My dad didn't listen to a lot of music. Johnny Cash occasionally, and old 45s of bebop groups from the 50s. He had a lot of comedy albums, Bob Newhart, Bill Cosby before the scandal. But it was in the car when my dad's musical tastes really came through. He always tuned the radio to an AM easy listening station. Very little singing. And he'd whistle along with the music, which was mostly elevator music. Although I don't think they play music in elevators anymore. Anyway, he was a fantastic whistler. He could whistle loud, and he could whistle very melodically, almost like singing. And it was strange that he wouldn't sing because my dad had a beautiful voice. He sang in the church choir off and on at St. Elizabeth's. And he didn't really sing outside of that, except for a span of years, probably from the time I was about 7 years old until I was about 11. And those were some special days. I remember Saturday mornings, bundling up, getting into the car while it was still dark outside, sitting in the back seat, my mom and dad in the front, and we'd drive what seemed like forever while the sun slowly rose until we arrived usually someplace outside of Detroit. These were times when we were taking a trip for my dad to compete along with 60 or 70 other men in a weekend of SPEBSQSA. SPEBSQSA. Now, it's an acronym, and usually acronyms are to make things easier. SPEBSQSA, it's difficult. It's a difficult acronym. But what's an even bigger mouthful is the organization itself, the Society for the Preservation and Encouragement of Barbershop Quartet Singing in America. Yeah, there's an organization called that, and my dad belonged to it for several years. Now, he was in a quartet off and on, but mostly he sang with a big group of men. I remember my favorite competition tuxedo of his was one of those classic 1970s tea-stained beige-colored polyester suits with a ruffle shirt and the wide brown velvet lapels, matching brown velvet bow tie. Boy, I thought he looked handsome. And there he'd stand with a group of, like I said, 60 or 70 other men, and they would sing barbershop songs. Now, you might think that's a strange thing for a little kid to like, but I really enjoyed that music. I don't know, perhaps I was an old soul, but it brought me to a different place, and I really liked it. my favorite song, because there were lots of songs I loved, but my favorite songs were the ones that were a little bit funny, especially in the way the men moved their faces to express themselves as they sang. But the very best one was a song called She Didn't Say No. And it started off like this. Listen now, you've got to hear a story that is true. Last night I took my sweetie out to ride in my canoe. And when I handed her a ring to try on just for size, I popped the question then and there, and much to my surprise. It goes on from there. Clearly, I didn't inherit my dad's beautiful singing voice or my mom's. I'm not really sure how that works out, but except for my younger sister, none of us kids can sing. Anyway, I loved those times with my dad. He was so very proud of himself for his participation in those choirs, and he really seemed to enjoy it. I liked seeing my dad that way because we didn't always have a good relationship. It was somewhat difficult, as his own relationship with his father had been. Now, here's what's strange. My dad passed in 2020, and in the months following, I went to Michigan to go through things that had been removed from his house by my stepmother. My sister sat in her pole barn for 2 days, going through boxes that probably hadn't been opened in years. We discovered lots of junk. We discovered lots of strange items that my dad had held on to, and a bunch of photographs. Photographs sometimes of people that we recognized, sometimes of people we didn't know at all, sometimes people that we figured out together who they were in the family. It was very exciting. And then as we were flipping through one of the boxes, up came this photograph of 4 men. It's black and white. They're dressed rather dapperly in suits, all of them standing 2 with each other facing in toward the other 2. I knew right away that one of them was my dad's dad, my grandpa Wiley, who I'd never met. He passed long before any of us kids were born. In fact, he passed when my dad was just 17, which might have been why their relationship had been difficult on some level. Behind these 4 men in the photograph, there was a wall with a little painted scroll on it. And across that scroll was the acronym SPEBSQSA. So my grandfather had been a member of the Society for the Preservation and Encouragement of Barbershop Quartet Singing in America. And perhaps knowing that now, that's why my dad was a member. It brought me closer to my dad in thought and heart, and I knew that whatever difficulties he had had with his own father and that I had had with my father, there are things that connect us and can never be erased and will last forever. Listen now, you've got to hear a story that is true.